Today, we're diving into an absolutely remarkable story of spiritual transformation. It's all based on the text, The Story of a Priest's Conversion to Islam, and it's this deeply personal account of a man who was right at the heart of his faith, who then embarks on a journey that would literally change everything about his life. And that really gets you thinking, right? What could possibly happen that would lead a devout Christian priest, a leader in his community, to leave it all behind for a completely new faith? This isn't just a story about changing religions, it's about a deep, personal, and relentless search for truth.
So, where does a story like this even begin? Well, interestingly, it doesn't start with some big crisis of faith. It actually starts with the quiet, nagging seeds of doubt growing in the mind of a man who had dedicated his entire life to serving God. And you really have to get this to understand the weight of his journey. This wasn't some casual churchgoer. He was a pillar of his community, a spiritual guide. People looked to him for answers. His whole life, his whole identity was built on the foundation of Christian doctrine.
So here's where the tension really starts to build. On one hand, you have his deep, sincere devotion to Christianity, including core beliefs like the Trinity. But on the other hand, this intellectual curiosity starts to bubble up. He has these unresolved questions about the singular, absolute nature of God. And that central conflict is what really kicks off this whole incredible journey.
So, faced with these massive questions, he didn't just ignore them or push them down, which, let's be honest, a lot of people would probably do. He did the exact opposite. He embarked on this very deliberate, very sincere quest for truth, and he decided he was going to look for answers wherever he could find them, even if that meant looking outside the bounds of his own faith. And this is so important to understand. His journey wasn't sparked by some emotional crisis or falling out with anyone. The source makes it really clear that this was a methodical, almost academic investigation. He was a scholar of faith seeking clarity, and he was applying that same rigor to the biggest questions in his own life. So, where does this methodical search lead him? Well, it leads him to a text he had never really studied up close before, the Quran. And he didn't approach it with any preconceived notions. He just came to it with the open mind of someone who was genuinely, truly seeking answers. And as he starts reading the Quran, things just start clicking. He begins to find these really direct, compelling answers that spoke right to the heart of his theological struggles. Let's take a look at what it was that resonated with him so powerfully. Okay, so the first big aha moment for him was the Islamic concept of Tawhid. This was the idea of God being absolutely one, singular, without any partners, without any division. And this message, in its directness and its simplicity, just hit him with incredible force. Now, why was that such a big deal? Well, because this principle of absolute monotheism gave him a clear, logically consistent answer to the exact questions that started this whole journey. For him, it must have been this moment of immense intellectual and spiritual relief, like he'd finally solved a puzzle he'd been working on for years. Then, another huge piece of that puzzle just snapped right into place. He starts reading about the role of the prophets in Islam, and he finds this narrative where figures he already revered, including Jesus, were honored as incredible human messengers sent by the one God, but not as divine beings themselves. And this is where it all really started coming together for him. This new viewpoint didn't take away from his respect for Jesus at all. In fact, it just placed him within a framework that felt completely consistent with the idea of God's absolute oneness. It resolved those final internal conflicts that have been bothering him for so long. So you can feel it, right? We're at a tipping point. What started out as this methodical, intellectual search was about to become a profound, life-altering spiritual conviction. This was the moment of truth, the moment of decision. And this all culminates in this incredibly powerful statement he made in a letter explaining his choice. He wrote, "I have found the truth that my soul had been searching for all my life." I mean, just think about that. It's a statement of absolute certainty, of profound peace. It's the end of a long, long search. And that was it. The search was over. The intellectual questions that had driven him for so long had been answered, and it led to this complete spiritual reawakening. A whole new path was suddenly laid out right in front of him. But the story doesn't just stop there, right? Because a decision like this isn't really an ending, it's a beginning. So the final part of the book really explores the sense of peace and purpose he found, and the actual principles he started to live by. That's the key takeaway here. For him, this wasn't just about closing a chapter on his questions. It was about opening a brand new book, one filled with a kind of profound peace and a clear sense of direction he hadn't had before.
And what's really fascinating is how the book shows us the how. It wasn't just about an abstract belief. It became a new way to live. It highlights these core principles for a happy life, like Iman, true belief, doing good deeds, always seeking knowledge, practicing gratitude, and being patient through tough times. It really turned theology into a practical blueprint for living. And when you think about it, this is what he was searching for from the very start. It wasn't just theological answers. In these principles, he found a practical, clear path to living a life filled with meaning, contentment, and that direct connection to God he was looking for. His search for truth had finally led him home.
So this whole story kind of leaves you thinking, doesn't it? It's an amazing testament to one man's intellectual and spiritual courage. But it also makes you ask a bigger question, no matter what you believe. What does it really mean to sincerely look for truth? And what are you prepared to do if you feel like you found it?